Welcome back for another crop talk. This week's topic, we're going to look at optional versus enterprise units. We're going to take a look at the differences between the two and which one is best for your operation. Disclaimer, again, these are just designed to be quick educational videos, so they're not going to cover all aspects of the coverages and policy, but should be informational for you. So first off, what the heck is a unit? If you're new to crop insurance or a little unfamiliar, in crop insurance, a unit is a grouping of insured acreage that is primarily pretty much used to determine your coverage premium and your potential indemnity payment. Easiest way to think about it is that it's the farm's planted acreage and how it's divided for insurance purposes. So let's take a look at optional units. Optional units are going to be at a glance the best coverage you can have, and because of that, they're going to be the highest premium. So optional units are going to break down the unit by county, crop, the crop type, your share, practice, and the section. So because of being able to break it down by that, it's going to make it better coverage because it's less spread out. Anytime that you can have that coverage be more condensed, the more likely you're going to be having at least maybe one or all of those units at a loss. The downsides of the optional unit is, like we said, because it's great coverage, it's going to have higher premium, and then you do have a little higher production reporting requirements. So if we take a look at the example on the right, each one of these fields, the way we have it written down, are going to be their own optional unit. So if we just take a look at the top left, those 260 acre fields, even though they're both spring wheat, they're both 100% share, because one is summer fallow and one is continuous crop. That makes them two separate optional units. And then if you take a look just to the right of it, at the right-hand side, they're both 160 acres, they're both winter wheat, they're both summer fallow, and they're both 100% share. But because of the fact that one is organic and one is traditional, that makes them two optional units. And then at the bottom left, because one of them is 100% share and one of them is 75% share, because they're two different share amounts, that makes them two different optional units. So again, optional units is the best coverage that you can have, but also because it's the best coverage, it's going to come with a higher price tag. If we take a look at enterprise units, that's going to break it down just by county and crop. And then also enterprise units has some additional options to be able to break it down more than that, but we're going to talk about that in the next slide. So to be able to qualify for enterprise units, you have to elect it by the sales closing period. But then on top of that, to be able to qualify for it, you have to have planted acres for that crop in two different sections, and at least the lesser of 20 acres or 20% of the insured crop acreage in the enterprise unit. It's referred to as the 20/20 rule. So easiest way to think about it is, let's say you have two sections seeded of wheat. One section has 80 acres or 100 acres, and the other section has 25 acres. Because both of them have 20 acres, you qualify. On the flip side, if you had two different sections, one of them had 100 acres and the other one had just 5 acres in it, it would not qualify for enterprise units. The benefits of enterprise units are that because it's a little bit more spread out, it has less premium, and the reason for that is it has a higher subsidy amount. And then there's also a little less production reporting requirements. But with that being said, it's always a good practice to keep track of your production on an optional unit basis. Even if you elect enterprise units, keep track on an optional unit basis, because of the fact that if you ever were to move from enterprise unit to optional units in the future, you have those records to do so. The downside of the enterprise units is, on the flip side of optional units, you're more spread out. So in theory, it makes it less likely to be at a loss. So for example, all of the same fields and information that we had on the prior slide, because it just, for an EU, an enterprise unit, all that it is breaking it down for is crop, or the county and the crop. And because all of it is wheat, it would be one enterprise unit. But you do have the ability to break it down a little bit more than that, as long as you elect it prior to the applicable sales closing date. The old saying is, Old MacDonald finally completed. We were finally able to complete Old MacDonald. And that's because of the acronyms that crop insurance sure loves to use. Enterprise unit, the acronym for that is EU. And then there's other acronyms that you can use. So enterprise by type. So for example, you could separate your winter wheat away from your spring wheat, or your lentils away from your green and yellow peas. Even though they're all dry peas, you can separate it out by type. Or if you're somebody that maybe has organic wheat and non-organic wheat, you could elect EO, and that would separate it out by organic practice. You can only elect one of them though, so you can't elect enterprise by type and enterprise by organic and enterprise by irrigated. You need to make that one election per county and per crop. So again, you have to elect that by the sales closing date. So that's an important thing to talk about with your crop insurance agent, to give them a good understanding of what your potential plans will be. So that way you can have the coverage and the unit structure that works best for you that year. And it might change on a year by year basis. So it's always good to talk about with your crop insurance agent of what your plans are that year. For example, if we take a look at enterprise by type, that's probably the most popular out of these options. If you do elect enterprise by type, each type, so for example, winter wheat and spring wheat, has to qualify by following that 20/20 rule. So you have to have at least 20 acres in two different sections of winter wheat, and then also at least 20 acres in two different sections of spring wheat for it to be able to qualify for enterprise by type. So if we take a look at the example on the right, if we were just looking at it as an enterprise unit, all of it's the same unit. But because we elected enterprise by type, we can separate out the winter wheat from the spring wheat. So anytime that you can condense that to less spread out, the better coverage you have. One also side note is that if you do elect enterprise unit, so EU, it's no added cost to elect the option of an enterprise by type or enterprise by organic practice or whatever it may be. So it's always a good practice to elect one of those to better separate out your farm. Just which one you select is going to depend on your plans for that year. So if you end up not qualifying for one of these options, we can take a look at what that means and what you maybe want to do before acreage reporting date, or if it's after acreage reporting date, what that means. So in this scenario, do these crops qualify for enterprise by type? Well, the winter wheat, for instance, is in two different sections, and it has at least 20 acres in each section. So the winter wheat qualifies, but because the spring wheat is only in one section, there's 160 acres, but it's only in one section, the spring wheat does not qualify. So if you elected enterprise by type, and then it comes acreage reporting date, the spring acreage reporting date of July 15th, and you realize that, well, I only seeded spring wheat in one section, what does that mean? What can you do? I know this slide's a little hard to see, but ultimately what it is saying is that if you don't qualify for each enterprise by type, if you are able to see it and notice it before the acreage reporting date, you have more options. And that primarily is that if you wanted to, you could leave the winter wheat as enterprise by type, but then make that spring wheat an optional unit. And the scenario where you would want to probably do that is, let's say maybe the winter wheat is looking really good and it might not be at a loss, and it's going to far exceed its guarantee, but the spring wheat, for whatever reason, that isn't looking the best, and you might be at a loss for that. You might want to have the winter wheat be an enterprise unit and then have the spring wheat be an optional unit. But if you don't make that realization prior to the acreage reporting date, your only option, if you didn't realize it until after the acreage reporting date, would make it be all one enterprise unit. So in that scenario, all of the wheat would be one unit, so it would maybe potentially kick you out of a payment on the spring wheat. So the reason why enterprise unit is so much less expensive is, first off, it's not quite as good a coverage, but also it has a higher subsidy amount. So if we take a look at the subsidy difference, just say on 75%, the subsidy amount for optional unit is 55%, whereas for enterprise unit, it's 77%. So at the end of the day, the government is paying more of the premium, which is going to make the farmer paid premium less. And then with that being said, basic unit is listed on there as well. Typically, you're not going to have a basic unit unless you don't qualify for an optional unit or an enterprise unit. So for the most part, you're going to be dealing with either optional or enterprise units. If we take a look at the cost comparison per acre, and this is just to give you an idea, it's looking at the 25 crop year, Hill County, revenue protection, non-irrigated, non-organic, using T-yield, 75% coverage level, pulling the numbers from the rain and hail quoting system. If you take a look at wheat, for an optional unit is, for winter wheat, spring wheat, around $12 for an optional unit, whereas the enterprise unit is closer to $5 an acre. Barley, just about $10 for an optional unit, a little, $3.50, $3.64 for an enterprise unit. Where you see some pretty significant savings is on the crops that maybe have a little higher guarantee. So, like lentils, mustard, if you're using the 45-cent contract, those for an optional unit might be about $32 an acre to insure at 75% coverage level. Whereas if you went enterprise unit, it would only be $12 or $14.93. So that's a pretty significant saving. But again, it's not quite as good a coverage, and ultimately it just comes down to what is best for your farm. Other side note is that for the optional coverages such as SCO, ECO, margin protection, those county-based coverages, whether you elect optional units or enterprise units, that's not going to affect your cost on those coverages. So ultimately, the question is, what unit structure is best for me and for your operation? And the long story short is that it's not a cop-out answer, but it really just depends on your operation. For some people, they might be extremely spread out, and it might be better to have optional units. And for somebody, maybe all of their land is really close together, and you're not really losing. It's very likely that if one aspect of your farm does well, the rest of it does well, then maybe enterprise is better for you just because of the cost saving. But ultimately, it just comes down to what is best for you and what you value. If you value the better coverage or the lesser premium. With that being said, it is possible to elect enterprise units on some crops and optional on others. So for instance, we see it's pretty popular maybe to use optional on wheat because maybe that's your most prevalent crop. And then you might do enterprise on some of the pulses, maybe dry peas, lentils, green peas, stuff like that. And then also if it's elected prior to the appropriate sales closing date, you do have the option to elect, by enterprise and optional by type. So for example, you could elect optional for winter wheat and then have your spring wheat be an enterprise unit. So you can really customize and have the flexibility to make it work for your farm and what is best for you. Please let us know if you have any questions. That's all we got for you today. Also, please reach out if you have any ideas of some topics you want us to cover. We'd be happy to do so. Thanks for following.